All right. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and see if what we have is actually reasonable and worthwhile to us. So what we want to do is just go ahead and get this on the screen in the simplest way possible. So we could go ahead and make a sprite. We could go ahead and write a function that does this. But we know that the easiest way to do this is just going to be writing directly into our bitmap, right? So what we're going to want to do is take this right here, and we're just going to say, well, first let's do a mem set on our bitmap, 0 bitmap size. So we just start off, everything is zeroed out. Then, by the way, if you haven't started doing this in Emacs yet, you can go ahead and open up your file in multiple little windows right here, so you can view different parts of it at the same time. It's pretty invaluable, especially when you're working with multiple files or a file like ours, which is a bit longer. Let's see, what am I looking for here? I'm looking for bitmap size right here. So I'm going to say if I is less than bitmap size, I want to say that bitmap of I equals our font bitmap of I, right? Now, keep in mind that our font bitmap is only 1 byte per pixel, right? So really what I want to do is say, hey, bitmap of I plus 1 is also font bitmap, right? And then I plus 2, and then I plus 3, right? And we'll do I plus equals 4 there. So this way we're just going to take each pixel of our bitmap and we're going to set it equal to the grayscale value of our font bitmap, right? And, you know, this, oops, yeah, I plus equals 4. Now, one thing that we want to go ahead and do is make sure that we aren't clearing our bitmap every time, and we can go ahead and comment these things out also, where we aren't even drawing anything else, right? So we compiled. Uh-oh, looks like we got a segmentation fault. So let's go ahead and see what that is. Well, that's should be a pretty easy one. You see I'm saying, well, I is less than bitmap size. That's not what I want, though. I want, well, I is less than font bitmap size, right? Because obviously I is always less than bitmap size. Okay. So we're getting that right there, which is something, right? It doesn't really look correct to me, though. So maybe our font is too small. Let's try, I don't know, 128. Well, that does look bigger, but it doesn't necessarily look correct. So, we probably need to do something a little more sophisticated to go ahead and see if we have the correct data. And the reason for this is our. Let's see, where's my cursor? Right here. Go ahead and bump the size up a little bit. So here's our screen, right? And let's say that down. How do I scroll in this program? Anyway, here is our bitmap, right? So our bitmap is smaller than our screen, right? A, B, C, right? So it is probably not right. Um, to go ahead and just always draw things straight from the bitmap like this, right? Because what we can see happening is if we're reading these pixels, right, off of the top row right here, right there, right, into our screen. And then we move in here onto our screen and we start reading the next row of pixels from our bitmap, but we're still on the same line on our screen, then things are going to be pretty skewed, obviously. So I think what we actually do want to do is go ahead and put this into a bitmap. So let's go ahead and clear that out. We can also go back and start doing our memset. So I'm going to do this where we define our player sprite. I'm going to make a sprite, and I'm going to call it font sprite, right? So I'm going to say that the font sprite dot width equals font bitmap width, and do the same thing for width and height. Then the size is going to be font sprite dot width times font sprite dot height times 4, right? Because our font bitmap is only in gray and it's only 1 byte, we still need 4 bytes for us, right? And we're going to go ahead and malloc some space for that, right? So here I'm going to say that we're just going to loop over everything, and we're going to say that font sprite.data and okay, yeah, so here is the thing. Our bitmap size is going to be a quarter of the size of our sprite, right? So I'm going to do this technique, which is actually very common in game development and probably just in C in general. I can't necessarily speak for that, but I can assure you that I do this all the time making games, is I'm going to say I times 4 plus 0, and don't worry, we'll see why that plus 0 there in a second. And I will go ahead and look at, what did we call it right here? We called it our font bitmap of I, right? And then I'll go ahead and copy paste that several times. And here it'll be +1, +2, +3, right? So if our font bitmap is 512 by 512, then we will only do this, was it 262,144,000 times, right? But here we're going to make sure that we do, for every pixel in our 1 byte per pixel font bitmap, we're going to set 4 pixels in our sprite bitmap. And so here you see we're going to be at the first pixel, and we multiply it by 4 because, when I is 0, we're going to be at pixel 0, 1, 2, and 3. Then when I is 1, we're going to be at pixel 4, or sorry, the byte 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, etc., right? So, and this +0, I just put this here to go ahead and have these things evenly lined up. You can, of course, go ahead and do that. It's +0. Mathematically, it's the same thing. It just is going to make our lives a little easier. So what I want to do now is go ahead and just say that our pixel size, I'm going to comment this out and just say, hey, pixel size is 1. The reason I'm doing this is I just want to see the actual pixels that we are reading from our font bitmap. I don't want to worry about doing the whole scaling thing, right? And now we can go ahead and do a draw sprite on our bitmap. With pitch, we'll do 0 and 0, and then we'll call this font sprite, right? And let's go ahead and check this out. Well, okay. That certainly looks like something, doesn't it? You notice that we don't have all of our letters, and we know that this is exactly our 512 by 512, right? Which sort of makes sense if you think about the dimensions of our screen. It looks like we could probably fit about 3 of those in here and about 2 of them, a little less than 2 right here. So this is the thing that STB TrueType wrote in to our bitmap, right? The issue is that we don't actually have all of the characters, right? We were supposed to do character 32 all the way through 128 or 127, right? So let's go ahead and look into that. If we pop into STB TrueType, then we see that this returns a value, and we can go ahead and look at what it is. See, returns the negative of the number of characters that fit. So clearly, this is probably returning a negative number. It looks like we couldn't fit all of the pixels at, what was the size that we used? 128. That's pretty big. Let's go ahead and bump that down. Let's say 64 and see if we can fit everything in then. Okay, now we have all our characters. Nice. All right. So the thing that we're going to want to do next is go ahead and find a way to find a single character in this big old image, right? And we're going to want to go ahead and draw only that character. So if our texture is 512 by 512, and let's say that our A character is, I don't know, well, we know it's going to be 64 pixels tall, right? Let's say it's only 40 pixels wide. We're going to want to look in here and find where the A character starts, find how wide it is, and find how tall it is, and draw that, right? So the way that I want to do that, actually, I want to demonstrate one thing real quick. Let's go ahead and turn the pixel size back on. So that means that for each pixel in our font, which remember is 512 by 512, we're going to draw it bigger, right? So let's draw it to be 2. Well, okay, so now we're drawing each of those pixels a little bit bigger. You can see that they look a little bit worse. You might not be able to pick it up on the video, but like these are just, they're starting to not look so good. Let's try 3. Yeah, okay, now you can definitely start to see that they are pixelated. So what we probably want to do is make sure that the characters in our font are the actual number of screen pixels that we're going to want to render in our game. So for these, we probably don't want to do the whole game pixel thing, right? We just want to make sure that the size of a character in our font is the correct size that we're drawing, like the squares and stuff, right? And I'm going to go ahead and try to move the square down just so we can get a perspective on how big it is. Just holding this down. Maybe it's because it's we're drawing the font after it. So in fact, after it. So in fact, if we go ahead, we just stopped drawing the player. That obviously that won't work. So let's go ahead and say that we draw the player afterwards, right? So if I go ahead and keep moving down, it shouldn't really take that long until we see our guy. but maybe it would take longer than we want. Oh, no, I was pressing the wrong key. Silly me. So yeah, we see we have our player right here, right? And, you know, it's 3 pixels small, so that's not really what we want for the size of our character, unfortunately. So we can go ahead and start to think about a way to deal with that. Probably the best way is to go ahead and make a function that's going to draw our sprite unscaled, right? And you know, I would go ahead and say that probably the fastest way to go ahead and do this right now is we'll make a function called drawSprite, and we'll call this drawSprite unscaled, right? And this is going to take the exact same dimensions that we have right here. And it's just not going to worry about using this drawPixel function. It's going to work a lot more like our drawRect function, where we are actually accessing the individual pixels of our screen in our bitmap and going ahead and drawing those, right? So what we're going to do here is have a, let's say we have a sprite row, which is just going to start, pointing at the very beginning of our sprite. And then we're going to have the sprite pitch, just like we calculated in the function above, which is going to be the width times 4. Then we are going to do pretty much the same thing as we did. I'll go ahead and pull the drawRect function up here for reference. We're going to do the start y times pitch, right? And then we'll do, in fact, you know, I can honestly just, I think, copy paste this code, which might be a bad habit to get into, but I'm not going to worry about it. So here we have the pixel, which is going to start pointing at the sprite row, right? Because again, we don't need to do this whole times start x thing for our sprite, because we know that, hey, we're drawing the whole sprite, right? We don't want to stop drawing after some number of pixels or wait until some number of pixels to start drawing. We want to just always start at the beginning, right? And then here, I'm going to do sprite pixel of 2, because remember, for our bitmap, we expect this to be blue, green, red, alpha, but our sprite is in red, green, blue, alpha. So we're going to want to go ahead and do that. Sprite pixel of 1, sprite pixel of 0, and then sprite pixel of 3, right? And then at the end, we're going to say, hey, sprite pixel plus equals 4, right? Because we want to move 4 bytes in our sprite. We could go ahead and do this type of thing, right? Where we said, like, sprite pixel plus plus, like we did in our drawRect function. The problem with that is, though, since we want to access these things in a different order, we're definitely going to want to use this this array indexing, where we just say, hey, get me the second byte from this offset, right? You know, if we wanted to, we could say sprite pixel plus 2, sprite, you know, something like that, right? Forget the last thing that I typed. But I think this is the clearest way to go ahead and do it. So now let's go ahead and call this with drawSprite unscaled for this guy, right? and we can go ahead and compile. Let's see, what did I mess up here? Let's see, that's 358. Invalid operands to binary, have uint 8 and unsigned int. That clearly doesn't seem right. Our bitmap is a bitmap. Our pitch is definitely correct. Let me go ahead and pop up right here to our draw rec, see if I'm doing something different. Oh, yeah, duh. It's one thing right here that we're doing wrong. We want this to be sprite.height and sprite.width, right? Because it's not like our draw rect function where we're passing those in. Those are part of the sprite that we have. So that'll clear up some of the errors. Now the only thing is, yeah, this needs to be plus, right? That, because again, it's a pointer. We aren't multiplying it by something. We're just adding something to the address. So now, well, it looks like we aren't. Yeah, right here. We want to say sprite row plus equals sprite pitch, right? So right here, we want to be moving along the sprite at the same time as we're moving along the screen, right? We're just doing it by different values. So here, yeah, okay. I want this to be unscaled. So there were two things wrong there. Okay. And now you see we have our guy, which is 3 still. So let's go ahead and bump that up. So where's a 3? Yeah, we can go ahead and return that to what it was, right? Wow, I clearly did something ridiculous. I typed a 3 at the beginning. That would obviously cause a lot of problems. Okay, so now we have our font bitmap unscaled, right? And we have our player scaled to the size that we want, at least for right now. And we're drawing the player on top. So every time, this is kind of wasteful because we're going to have to go over these pixels, draw the font. Then we're going to go over them again and draw the player on top of them, just overwriting what we've done. But that's fine. I don't know. Maybe on your Raspberry Pi it's a little bit slow. If so, I apologize, and we'll make sure to speed things up going forward. But yeah, so I think our bitmap is working a lot nicer now, where we have this really nice ability to go ahead and just change. We can draw things scaled up, or we can go ahead and draw things at the normal scale that we want, right? And that is pretty powerful. So in the next video, we can go ahead and start looking at how we access individual characters. The one thing I want to do before, though, is right now we have our what is it? Cell screen width and cell screen height, which should be always the same values. Again, we might want to change that. But let's go ahead and say here that our font pixel height is going to be our cell screen height, right? So we're going to say, hey, the size of a character in the game is the size of one of these grid units, right? So it looks like we need now to make our font a bit bigger. So let's go ahead and say that this is 1024 by 1024. Well, okay. That certainly looks big enough. It looks like we're also There's a whole lot of room we're not using here. So, because we can see obviously this is not 1024 tall. What if we just say that this is still 512? You think that's okay? No, clearly not. Let's see what is some good. Oops, I wanted my calculator. What is 2 to the 10th or 2 to the 9th? Oh, duh, it's 512. So there's not really a power of 2 in between them. Well, okay, I think that's fine. We'll just have a bitmap that's maybe a little bit bigger than we need it to be. But that's fine because we are making sure that we have all our characters. So, yeah, in the next video, let's go ahead and start accessing those characters and drawing them onto the screen.